Okay, this is the 30th of August, 1997. We're in Columbus, Ohio, and it's Victoria Ekegren interviewing. And I'm here with Dave Monesmith.
Right.
With the 134th. Tell me, where were you born?
I was born in Springfield, Ohio, just west of here. Came through a couple of days ago. In fact, yesterday. And it was good to get back after 75 years.
Tell me about your family.
Well, I have... can you cut this?
Do it? Yeah. Tell me about your father and your mother.
Well, my father was a Lutheran minister, and he was his father, my grandfather, and family lived here in Columbus. And I was born in Springfield, and then we moved to Kansas, Bendina, Kansas, a little town up in the northeast corner. Dad had a church there. And then Emerson, Nebraska, and then Seattle, Washington. Went all through school in Seattle and Everett. And then they drugged me kicking and screaming into the service. And I was drafted there, and then went to the 14th Armored Division.
How's life during the Depression?
It was good for us. We never really had very much money, never have, but it was an enriched life. And my father worked hard, and the parishioners of the church, of course, were always very helpful. But we got through it all right, but we learned an appreciation of values that a lot of people didn't. So it was helpful.
Can you tell me about your schooling?
Well, went through several schools because Dad had churches in various cities, but most of my schooling, like from the 3rd grade up, was in Seattle. And went through first year of high school, Roosevelt High in Seattle, and then finished high school in Everett, Washington, just north of there. And went to work for Boeing Aircraft Company, and then the service got me. And except for a very short stint in ASTP with the Armored Force, that was the last of my formal schooling, but I've had a lot of individual courses subsequent to that, and went to the School of Hard Knocks, and business learning and education.
How did Pearl Harbor affect you?
It was very moving. Of course, I was young, like most of us were at that time, and it was devastating to think that something so horrendous could occur. Terrible.
How did that change your view of the war?
Of the world?
Of the war that was going on, and the world and stuff.
Well, for one thing, it made me realize that we were not immune, as we had always thought we were. Everything prior to that that had any part of the United States involved was on somebody else's soil, and for the first time it was ours.
Mm-hmm. What did you was your dad in World War I?
No. He was a minister and exempt from service during World War I. Yeah.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had a brother and a sister. My brother died very young at about 36, and my sister lived until just a few years ago. My brother was 4 years older than I, and my sister 2 years older, and I was the baby of the family.
Mm-hmm. So when did you join the Army?
It was 1942, November 28th. And as I said, I didn't join, they drugged me. But I was happy with the way life was, but everybody had to serve, and I served.
Where did you go when you got drafted?
I was inducted in Seattle, and then went to Fort Lewis, Washington, and for the basic deal. Well, not basic, but that was my initial introduction. Mm-hmm. Then I was shipped to the 14th Armored Division at Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, and trained with them, and did a great deal of... I was a driving instructor for all of the vehicles that the Army has. And then after that went to ASTP at Oklahoma A&M, and was then transferred out of there to the 12th Armored Division and served the rest of the service with them and went overseas with them.
Who are some friends that you remember at this time?
Well, let's see, I had quite a few. I found two that I was looking for. One, Jim Burney, he has since passed away, but I got to know him for about a year subsequent to the service. And through him and through the organization here, I was able to find Paul Hoffman, and we've become very close.
Tell me about coming to Abilene. What are your first initial?
Oh, kind of excitement in a way, because it was not my first post, but it was new and interesting and a good-looking camp, much better than Chaffee, and nice little town, and warm, friendly people, and that's when we had already finished all of our basic training. I had, so it was down to earth, just working and training some more and doing all the things that you do in a camp, you know.
What are some? Can you tell me about some of the training that you go through in Abilene?
Well, I remember specifically the combat training course where you crawl in the mud under the barbed wire and they shoot live bullets over you. And this was, I guess I was too young and stupid to realize just how dangerous that could be, but it was fun in a way. I didn't like the long hours and the dust. We used to kid about the fact that you could march in the rain down there and kick up dust, because it was always dusty in Texas. And but it was not all bad. I wouldn't want to do it again, but glad I had it.
Tell me about the living in Berkeley.
Well, the barracks were, for Army barracks, not too shabby. They were pretty nice, two-story barracks. Chaffee, on the other hand, was the old plywood barracks, but it was clean, thanks in great amount to those of us who had to police the area and who were taught to field strip our cigarettes and all the good stuff. But the training was interesting and fun in some regards, and petty in others. Mm-hmm. You got, not all people are good, and not all officers are person-to-person people, and nor do they want to be in the service. So there was a little bit of everything, but it was a good growing experience, I think, and trained us well for what we had ahead of us.
What are some fun times that you remember in Abilene?
Well, I had a couple of buddies that used to go into town, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was a dry town, but we used to have little zipper bags, and we'd take a six-pack and go in and have fun. And before I left there, I was married in 1943, and my wife came down and spent 1 month before I had to ship over. So we had a lot of fun with a little steakhouse there with much good times. So it was good. We had a little house that was about the size of most bathrooms.
Where did you meet your wife?
I met her on in Kansas City. I was on a leave, went back to Seattle, and on the way back, we got hung up in Kansas City with a flood. No trains were coming in or out, so I was hung up for 3 days, and I met her at a USO dance.
So did you guys, you started writing when you were in training?
Yep, that's right.
And how long were you corresponding before you met?
Oh, it was very short. It was less than a year we were married, and I think I met her in May and April and May, and we were engaged just about 3 months later and married in December of '43. So we had 51 and a half years.
Where did you get married? Where did you get married?
In Kansas City.
And she moved down to Abilene with you? Or?
Not right away. She came down just the last month before we went overseas. But she was working, and we thought we'd like to be together. We didn't know how soon we were going over. So she moved down, and we had 1 month.
What did she think about Evelyn?
Small, not much to do, a lot of dust, and if it wasn't for the buddies that came over after working hours or on weekends, why, it would have been pretty dull for her, I think.
What are some, do you remember any practical jokes at Camp Bartlett?
Well, let's see. No, I really can't. Most of the fun stuff that went on that was crazy was overseas in Europe.
Tell me about who your commanders at this time. Do you remember any particular officer that you can describe to me?
Well, Colonel Wood, of course, was our commanding officer for the 134th, and I was in battalion headquarters. And oddly enough, they've quit referring to it as battalion headquarters, even though it's a separate company and separate listing on the original roster and everything else. But he was a short little guy and an authoritarian. We had a few really good officers. Most of them were pretty good in some respects, and others were kind of chicken. But that's normal in the service.
What did you did you participate in any sports?
No, not really. Not while I was there.
Can you describe the camaraderie between the men in the camp?
Very warm. I think because of the nature of things, you're forced into comradeships that normally you wouldn't be, but you find people who have interests similar to yours and warm-hearted and outgoing, and the ones who are not, you simply leave those to people who like their type of activity. But I found some very good and warm friends down there. A couple I've never been able to find. I've looked and looked, but haven't found them.
Tell me about departing from Abilene.
Well, kind of an exciting time, really, because we knew we were going over, and this was new and different and educational and frightening at the same time, because we didn't know what was ahead of us. Never having been to Europe or anything else, or done a heck of a lot of traveling. It was kind of excitement, but also frightening at the same time.
Can you describe the train ride up to?
Crowded and hot and tiring and frustrating, and the the curtains had to be down as you went through cities so that people wouldn't know it was a troop train, and that was kind of a down point, but understandable now.
What was your impressions about Camp Shanks?
Oh, still different in an exciting sort of way, and not knowing what was coming next, being in unfamiliar territory, and not really knowing when we were shipping, because that was not made known, of course. But just about like other camps, except for that, not knowing.
What are you thinking about the war at this time? Does it hit you that you're that close, or
That I was what?
that you're that close actually to the war now?
No, it's never really left me in a lot of ways. I've had a lot of very vivid memories of it, and I don't dwell on it, of course, because as the time goes on, you tend to look at the good times and forget the cold and the dirt and all of the other things that were bad.
What have you been trained to do?
In the service? Well, prior to the service, I was working for the military, the Army, at Fort Lawton, Washington, and I was a chauffeur, and I drove all of their equipment there. And that's how I happened to be assigned to an armor division, I think, as a driver. And the interesting thing was that I was able to drive and train. I was an instructor in everything the Army had. And so that was interesting and fun, and I got to meet a lot of different people from different companies that I wouldn't have gotten to know otherwise, because we spent months out in the field at a camp where they would send the school kids out for training, and we would train them in the vehicles that they needed to be trained in to learn to drive and to handle proficiently. And then they'd go back into the base again, and then they'd send another group out. So, and that's one of the fun things, really, because a good buddy of mine who was very close, he was later killed. On weekends, when they didn't have a class coming out, we would sign out of the camp in the field. So they thought we were in the barracks at the regular base. And the base thought we were still out in the field, but we were in town. We had more wonderful 3-day passes. Never got caught.
Did you get to go to New York?
Yes, went to New York one time, Times Square, and did the whole works and looked around and saw it all. I was only there for one day, but it was fun.
What were you trained to do in combat?
In combat, I was driver, and I was also the gunner. I drove the half-track for the colonel, for the battalion command, and then we were up in forward CP a good bit. So whenever we were strafed or had any problems of that sort, why, I was the gunner as well. So I was trained to drive the half-track, to maintain it in first echelon maintenance, and to fire the .50 caliber and do my usual job and guard and all the other stuff.
Tell me about the ship that you crossed then.
That was the Empress of Australia, and she was a beauty, or she had been until they made it for thousands and thousands of GIs and stacked 5 or 6 high in bunks this close, and a lot of sick GIs. We had one young fellow who got sick going up the gangplank. It was psychological, but he never got over it until he stepped back on solid soil again. But I never got sick. Enjoyed the trip, really, as much as you can enjoy that kind of a trip. But not a bad. We landed in Southampton and went on to Tidworth Barracks from there.
Tell me about Tidworth.
Tidworth was old and very sedate, like the British build in brick, and solid and old, and straw mattresses and straw pillows. In fact, a lot of us got head lice from the straw. They sprinkled us and got us over that. Fortunately, being the colonel's driver, I was called upon by one of the officers. It wasn't the colonel, and I've even forgotten who it was, but he wanted to see more of England, so he requisitioned a jeep, and we took off, and I got to see a lot of England, including the Stonehenge, where you can't even get close to now because too many people have been there, and a lot of England. It was beautiful, all the thatched roof houses and the quaint construction of homes and the British people, and it was beautiful. I enjoyed that.
How would you describe the British people?
Warm in general, but I think most people are if you give them warmth. The people who complain about the cold, heartless and friendless people, I think, are the ones who don't reflect it. So I had never had any trouble with them. I found them to be very, very kind, very kind.
Tell me about crossing the channel.
Yeah, LST 533. Loaded with GIs and equipment, and it was bumpy and cold and exciting. But when it landed at Le Havre and went up to Rouen and disembarked in Rouen, picked up our vehicles, and went on from there.
What do you first remember when you just crossed the channel and you're stepping onto French soil?
Exciting, and frightening in a lot of ways, because you never know how close danger really is. But we were so young that it was more excitement and adventure than fear at that time. It didn't really become fear until we got up into forward CPs and into close contact with the Germans. But aside from that, it was beautiful country and interesting and exciting, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But that's the way I've always felt about things.
What was your first battle experience?
Yeah, let's see, the first one, I don't recall. There were several, but we went up into forward CP several times, and we were strafed, ME-109s, and I recall one comical thing that happened. The colonel and the major would always watch me, because I had the command half-track and the 50 caliber. Of course, we had the ACAC and the outer periphery, but outer perimeter. But when I would hear a plane, kind of like radar on MASH, I ran for my half-track, and I'd hit the roller in the front and the hood and drop into the cab and up into the ring turret and load and ready to go when they came over. And they didn't give us much warning one time. Usually you could pick up ACAC out in the distance, and he'd give you a little warning as something might be coming your way. And this time I didn't get anything. So when I finished and they had made their pass over and we had fired, the colonel and the major climbed out from under their command car and said, "Monesmith, you got to give us more warning."
What are some encounters you have with Germans?
Well, we were walking in a little German town, and there was a little Polish girl who lived there, and she was bilingual, spoke pretty good English, and there were a buddy and myself. And we ran into two men who were in civilian overcoats, long gray overcoats. And by that time, I had taken German in high school, and I was fairly conversational. So I talked to them and asked them why they weren't in the service, and I got what I thought was a reasonable answer. It's hard to tell in a short conversation. And we let them go, and they walked about 50 feet, and the little Polish girl said, "Those are not civilians, they're soldiers." So we pulled our guns and, well, already had our TO weapons with us, but went up and captured them, opened their coats, and they had German uniforms on underneath. So the sergeant I was with had been wounded, and he was a little angry with Germans. So he was going to shoot this one fella, and I wouldn't let him. I grabbed the gun and pushed it aside. And we walked him down through town, and we had just opened and just started a prisoner enclosure. So later we found that several Germans turned themselves in because we hadn't shot these two. So I'm standing there searching one of them, and I had my automatic in my hand, searching with the other hand. And I heard a voice behind me that said, "Dave, I don't think you need your pistol." And he was holding a Thompson submachine gun on the guy, so I thought that was enough, so I put my gun away and searched him. But it's kind of funny.
What's the closest you came to battle?
Well, when you're being strafed by airplanes, that's about as close as you get. And then the capture of those two personally. But as far as actually shooting at individuals, fortunately, I never got into that. The infantry, of course, was up closer and had that, but we were fortunate in being a little bit behind and not having to see that from a man-to-man position. So the closest we ever got was airplanes and that sort of thing.
What do you remember about Herrlichon?
They all blend together. Except for knowing that it was one of the towns that I recall. None of them except Heidenheim ring a bell of any great. Well, New Ulm does, but not Herlesheim. I know we were there, but I don't recall.
What happened in Heidenheim?
Well, that was when the war finally ended, and they released some Russian prisoners who had been there. They had come down to our mess hall, which was a huge auditorium across from where we were living, and they'd come down and get garbage cans and beg for our trash out of our mess kits, so they were starving. And then I think VE was celebrated at that time. And I remember we broke open a bottle, celebrated the end of the war, and then somebody said it was a false alarm, so we bottled it up, corked it. This happened 3 times until it was finally official.
Tell me about Christmas.
Christmas was wonderful. I was over there for 2 Christmases, and in one Christmas, we went out and cut a tree, and all we had was popcorn, and we popped that and made garlands of that. And at that time, they had tinfoil and cigarette packs, and so we could make little ornaments. And also, the government issued condoms in packets that were crimped, and they were together. You tear them apart, So they were in silver and gold. So we, like popcorn, we stitched up through the crimped part, and we made garlands of condoms for the tree. It's a one of a kind.
You have some other stories here.
Beg your pardon?
You have some other stories here. Something about a breakfast in New Ulm.
Oh yes, New Ulm was cold, snowy, miserable. Wind was blowing, and we got up in the morning, and they would serve us breakfast, and we take your mess kit, which is cold to hold, and put hot cereal in your. And you'd think, this is wonderful, and then he poured ice cold milk over it, and I'll never forget it. Yeah.
You have some poems listed here, at least poems that you have written? Or?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have them to read?
Yes, I do. I wrote The Voice of Freedom at the day they gave me my discharge. And The Unseeing Eyes was written after guard duty one morning, about 2 in the morning. And I had come off guard duty. It was one of those pitch black nights where you can't see your hand in front of your face. And I realized that I was sensing things more than seeing them. Close to a fence, you can kind of get a sense that you're near something. And so when I got to thinking about being blind, and I wrote those.
Would you mind reading them, please?
I couldn't get through them. But I would like to make them a part of the history if Doctor wishes to take them.
Definitely. Even if you could do it at home, maybe, just with a recorder.
Oh, I'll do that, sure.
Yeah.
And I have a book of poetry that I wrote through the years also. And
did you send your wife these poems?
oh yes.
How much would you tell her in the letters?
Oh, the usual. How much you miss, And there wasn't a lot you could tell about where you were, but she followed me because of the notations in the papers about the 7th Army. Yeah. And they would tell her where the 7th Army was. And then, of course, we fought one battle with Patton and the 3rd Army. But knowing that we were there, well, she kept track of roughly where we were.
What do you remember about working with Patton? Do you remember?
We cleared them to the ditches. That was all there was to it. He wanted distance and not clearing of the enemy. He was pretty much of an egomaniac, as everyone knows. And So his idea was to travel fast and hard and have enough force so that they couldn't wipe us out and come in behind us. And so we took a lot of territory. Clark was a little different type of a general, softer spoken, a very intense man, and a good Army general, I think. And we fought one major battle with him and one with Patton, and we have 2 battle stars. And Colmar Pocket was one of the major areas that we were engaged in.
Okay, can you tell me about that?
Well, we encircled a huge amount of Germans in the Colmar Pocket and captured them, put them completely out of service. And at one time, my half-track was the radio half-track for the battalion. And at one time, because of our position, we were the only one that had contact with the division through our half-track. And I had 2 radio operators and myself. And also, during that time, someone captured, I understood it was a barge, other people think it was a warehouse, I don't know. But you could go down and sign General Half-Track or General or whoever you wanted and get a case of pretty good champagne. So one of our boys did, and the 3 of us through the next few months killed 50 bottles of French champagne. I never thought I would ever like it again. But
what are some other things that you remember were some other good times?
Well, let's see. Let's see if I can remember from some of my notes. Gosh.
Who are some people that you remember? Do you remember any?
Well, Don Post and George Parks, Doug Post and George Parks were my 2 radio operators. They were wonderful people. And Don Pierce was a particularly good friend, and I've looked for him for 52 years and can't find him. So I don't even know if he's still alive, but we developed some really warm and fun friendships. And a little incident that occurred at ASTP, which is backing up just a little. While I was there, we had waves in the going to school there also. And then they had the sorority houses. We were on our way to town one day, and all GIs on the bus, sitting with each other and chatting. We got up to a sorority house, and there was a whole group of girls, sorority sisters, getting ready to get on the bus to go to town also. And nobody said a word, but it was as though somebody had planned the whole thing. They stood up, and everybody separated, and each one of us took 1 seat. So the bus was filled with GIs with 1 seat open next to each of us. And the girls got on board, and they looked, and they saw what we had done and laughed, and so each one of them sat with a GI, and we had more fun going to town.
Tell me again, what do you remember about the day, what do you remember about people's faces when they found out that the war is finally over?
Oh, elation.
How did you feel?
Same way. It was wonderful.
What was the first thing you wanted to do?
Well, I wanted to go home, of course, but I didn't have enough points. And you remember the system. Well, you might not, but you had to have enough points to go home. So I thought, well, I've done my share now. Now I'll do what I can for me. So I got assigned to the 7th Army Show School in Seckenheim, Germany, where we learned to put on plays and do musicals and then take them back to the division and give some entertainment to the guys. But while I was there, a representative from the 7th Army Alpine Chalet down in Oberjoch, Germany, came to the school, and he needed a communications man to set up communications between the three chalets there. And I said I could do that. So he took me down there, and I set up the communication, laid all the wires and put in the communication system, all the phones. Once that was done, there was nothing else to do except maintain it, and there was no maintenance really. And I had been a professional singer during my earlier years, still just a kid, but I sang with bands and had a radio show, and so I sang with the band that night for the dances, which they had every night when they bring the nurses and all the females down and the men to learn to ski and have a week of skiing and fun. So it was ski all day and free drinks and singing with the band and having a ball. So it was 3.5 months of that in the Alps was a nice way to finish it. And then I had enough points, they called me, and I went home.
Tell me about going home.
Well, let's see. I was transferred to the 1st Armored Division up at Bremerhaven to go home, and we waited there for, I don't know, seemed like forever. A couple of weeks, I guess. And finally got on the Norway Victory. 19 days coming home. There were 5 storms in the channel, and we hit all 5 of them and broke a hole in the number 1 hole in the ship. So we pulled into the Azores for 3 days for repairs, and they sent divers down and fixed the hole so we could come home. And while we were there, A through M, they always divided everything up alphabetically. A through M got to go ashore. And A through M raised so much hell on shore that M through Z never got to go ashore, and I was M for Monesmith, so well, I had to stay on board. But I guess the first group had an awful lot of fun. And then there were the 19 days, slow, tiring, cold, but interesting because we were on our way home.
Would you remember about seeing, so your fiance at the time, your wife at the time, and your family, what do you remember?
Oh, wonderful. Beyond description.
Can you describe the day?
See, February 21st, 1946. She's gone. We've had a wonderful life after that. Spent Kansas City. I became a professional photographer. Ran a portrait studio for a year there, and then was asked to go with one of my former instructors to San Diego and run a studio with him. And the job he was looking for, or had been promised in Hollywood, fell through, so he didn't need me in the studio anymore, and I went into aircraft business and in photographic work in aircraft. And all the rest of my life, practically, I don't know whether you're interested in the post-war as much, but spent most of it in aircraft and aerospace for the rest of my life.
Tell me about your medals. I know you have some medals listed, some awards.
Well, the standard medals for the good conduct, which may not have been deserved, and the American ribbon, of course, which we all got, and the Afro-American, and the European, African, Asian, with the 2 battle stars, and then the discharge. Those are the ones we all earned over there. Fortunately, I didn't get the Purple Heart, but a lot of our guys did.
Are there some other stories that I have missed?
Beg your pardon?
Are there some more stories or anything else that
I don't think so. The war, I think, had a wonderful influence on my life. I've always felt, and a lot of our younger people wouldn't believe this, but I think that our younger men and women, but preferably the men, should spend some time in the service just to learn discipline. It's difficult at the time, but I think it makes a better man out of you.
Tell me about this reunion.
It's great. I was only able to come for one day, but I got in yesterday evening just in time for our dinner. I had to drive in from Wichita in 2 days, and then tomorrow morning I leave and head back 2 days. But seeing my buddy Paul has been wonderful, and a lot of the other friends that I didn't know before. And in our hospitality room, we were able to go over a bunch of the old stories and reminisce and see fellows that I hadn't seen before, and some I didn't even remember. I can't get over how much they've aged. As the story goes, a fellow said his friends had aged so much they didn't even recognize him. But that's about it.